My sister falsely accused me of writing an essay to steal our parents' inheritance. I'm not sure where to begin with this. The last few months have been the most stressful, confusing, and heartbreaking period of my life. I never imagined things could get this bad, especially with family. I've had a strained relationship with my sister for as long as I can recall, but this is something I never expected. To give some context, my sister and I have always been at odds. She's 35, I'm 38, and we've been fighting over petty things since I was a kid. But it didn't stop as we grew older. It wasn't just the usual sibling rivalry either. She was always harboring a deep resentment, particularly toward me. It only got worse as we grew up. Looking back, I realized that a lot of it had to do with our parents. They were always closer to me than to her. And while I didn't realize it at the time, it's clear now that this played a significant role in why we never got along. My sister never had such a strong connection with them. They were distant from her, almost cold at times, and she always blamed me, as if it was my fault. I suppose she felt like I was the golden child, and she was just left on the sidelines. Let's fast forward to now. Our parents are getting older, and their health isn't what it once was. It's been difficult to watch them decline, especially given what's likely to happen soon. And with that, the inevitable discussion about inheritance began. I never really paid attention to it. It was not something I was thinking about, especially given everything else going on. But my sister was always obsessed with the question of who would get what. About 6 months ago, I learned that my parents intended to leave the majority of their estate to me. I didn't know all the details, but it made sense given how strained their relationship with my sister had been over the years. When she found out, she lost it completely. And that's when things began to spiral out of control. At first, it was just a string of angry phone calls and texts from her accusing me of manipulating our parents and convincing them to remove her from the will. She claimed I had always been their favorite, that they had always treated her as if she were nothing, and that they were now doing it again, by leaving her with practically nothing. I tried to explain that it wasn't my decision and that this was between her and them, but she wasn't listening. She threatened to take me to court, saying she would contest the will and fight for her share. I assumed she was just lashing out as she always did, blowing things out of proportion. But then she went nuclear. A few weeks later, my parents called me unexpectedly. They sounded shaken and confused, and they asked me to come over right away. When I arrived, the expressions on their faces told me everything. Before they spoke, something was very wrong. They informed me that my sister had accused me of sexually abusing her when we were children. I couldn't believe what I heard. It felt as if the ground had been ripped out from beneath me. I'd never touched her, and now she was telling my parents that I had done something horrifying, something that could not only ruin my relationship with them, but also my entire life. I was furious, confused, and terrified all at the same time. My parents weren't sure what to believe. They were shocked and devastated, and I could see doubt in their eyes, which only made matters worse. I spent hours trying to explain to them that none of it was true, that my sister was lying because of the inheritance. But the seed of doubt had already been planted, and no matter what I said, they didn't seem to trust me completely. I can't tell you how crushing it was to see your own parents doubt you after a lifetime of love and trust. The situation worsened over the next few days. My sister informed extended family members about the accusation, spreading the lie even further. I began receiving calls from aunts and uncles, all asking what was going on. Some even believe her story. I could not believe it. I was being portrayed as a monster, and the more she spread the lie, the more difficult it became to defend myself. I'm not sure how, but my sister must have convinced herself that if she made this accusation loud enough, our parents would remove me from the will and give her what she wanted. She has always been manipulative, but I never imagined she would go this far. She is resorting to serious acts of abuse to achieve her goals. It felt like a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. It didn't take long for the rest of the family to choose sides. Fortunately, some of them did not believe any of it. They were aware of my sister's history of lying and manipulating, and they did not believe her story. However, others were skeptical. They said things like, well, maybe it's true, or why would she make something like that up? It was gut-wrenching. People I'd known my entire life questioned my integrity based solely on my sister's lies. At this point, my sister was unrelenting. She continued, telling anyone who would listen that I had abused her as a child. She tried to bring up old memories, twisting events from our childhood into something dark and sinister. It was surreal hearing her version of events, which I knew had never occurred. Being drawn into the story of abuse and trauma, I didn't recognize the life she described. Nonetheless, people began to believe her. The worst part was seeing my parents split apart. They did not know what to do. They were caught between their two children, one accusing the other of the most heinous acts imaginable. I could tell they didn't fully believe her, but the doubt lingered in the back of their minds. I cannot express how much that hurt. If you were raised by your own parents, you may begin to wonder if you are capable of such heinous acts. I knew I needed to fight back, but I wasn't sure how. It was her word against mine, and no matter how much I denied it, the accusation was already public, tainting everything. Update. The days following the accusation were a blur. I was constantly anxious, trying to figure out how to clear my name despite the lack of evidence. How can you defend yourself against something that never happened? It wasn't like there were any witnesses who could support either of us. It was just her word against mine, and the claim was as serious as sexual abuse. People are quick to believe the victim, or give them the benefit of the doubt. I couldn't sleep thinking about how chaotic my life had become. Every time the phone rang, I dreaded answering. I was afraid it was another family member calling to say they believed her. It felt as if my life was unraveling, like everything I had built, every relationship I had nurtured was crumbling in front of my eyes. I could not look at my parents without feeling betrayed and sad. They were the people I needed on my side the most, and I wasn't sure if they'd ever completely trust me again. Then there was my sister. She was unrelenting. I still don't know how she turned our childhood into something so dark, but she did. She painted a picture of herself as a victim of mine, an abuser who had tormented her for years. She even began claiming that the reason she never had a good relationship with our parents was due to the trauma I allegedly caused her. It made me sick to hear her talk about our childhood like that, making minor disagreements and sibling squabbles into something they never were. Things came to a head when my parents invited my sister to sit down with all of us, her, me, and them, to talk things out. To be honest, I did not want to do it. I felt sick just thinking about sitting in the same room with her after everything she'd said. But I knew I had no choice. I had to face this head on if I was ever going to clear my name. We met at my parents' house, where many of our childhood memories were formed. She was distorting her memories into something twisted. As we all took our seats, the air was thick with tension, and no one spoke for a moment. My parents were clearly struggling, attempting to keep things civil, but the pain on their faces was palpable. Finally, my father spoke. He asked my sister to explain why she was making these accusations. Even after all these years, she did not hesitate. She went right into her story, telling how she had always been afraid to speak up, how I had allegedly threatened her to keep quiet, and how the trauma of what I had done had ruined her relationship with our parents. I couldn't believe what I heard. She seemed to have rehearsed the entire thing, as if she had been planning it for years. She even began crying at one point, as if she were reliving all of this trauma that never occurred. When she finished, my father turned to me and waited for my response. I could see the pain in his eyes, the lingering doubt, and it broke my heart. But I kept it together and told the truth. I informed them that nothing she said was true, that I had never put my hand on her, that this was all a twisted attempt to have me removed from the will. I did not raise my voice or try to argue with her, just calmly stated the facts. I could see my mother in tears, but she said nothing. The room went completely silent after I finished speaking. My parents weren't sure what to believe. I could see it on their faces. They were torn between their two children, and no matter what either of us said, they would never know the whole truth. They just sat there, staring at the floor, until my father quietly stated that he needed time to think about everything. That was it. The meeting ended exactly like that, with no resolution or answers. My sister stormed out and I left shortly after, feeling as if nothing had happened. They continued to see me as the villain and her as the victim. It felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, unable to awaken no matter what I did. The days that followed were brutal. My parents were distant, not returning my calls, and unwilling to discuss what had happened. I knew they were struggling with everything, but it hurt to be kept in the dark like that. I had no idea what they were thinking, whether they trusted me or were still unsure. Meanwhile, my sister kept going. She continued to spread her lies, telling more people in the family and even hinting at it on social media without mentioning me. It was as if she was determined to destroy me and take everything from me simply because she couldn't bear being left out of the will. My stomach turned every time she posted something. She was playing the victim card so well that I began receiving messages from distant relatives asking if what she was saying was true. I was losing control of everything, and it seemed like there was no way out. Then something unexpected occurred. My parents called me one night, and this time they didn't seem distant. They sounded angry. They'd been digging into my sister's story, asking for more details, and trying to figure out what was going on. And apparently, the more they pressed her, the more her story began to unravel. She could not keep her lies straight. She began contradicting herself, and it soon became clear that she had made everything up. My parents didn't tell me everything she said, but they seemed furious. They could not believe their own daughter would go to such lengths to harm me, to tear our family apart for money. They repeatedly apologized to me, saying they regretted ever doubting me. I could hear the pain in their voices, and while it didn't erase everything that had happened, it was comforting to know they were finally on my side. When my parents called to apologize, I felt a huge weight lifted off my chest. It was as if, for the first time since this nightmare began, I could finally breathe. Knowing that they believed me and saw through my sister's lies was a huge relief. However, the damage was already done. They informed me that they had confronted my sister about her story. I requested more specific dates and any evidence to back up her claims. The more questions they posed, the more she struggled to respond. She initially tried to stick to her story, claiming she had repressed memories and couldn't recall everything clearly. But eventually, she began contradicting herself. My parents noticed that her accusations were falling apart, and they realized she was lying. I wanted to feel good about it. I actually did. But truthfully, while I was relieved to have my name cleared, the entire situation left me feeling hollow. This was not a misunderstanding that we could simply ignore. My sister accused me of something heinous, which could have destroyed my life if anyone outside the family had believed her. And now I wasn't sure how we were supposed to move on from this. My parents were devastated. I could hear it in their voices when they phoned. They were heartbroken. Not only did my sister try to ruin my life, but they also lost their daughter in the process. They were obviously furious with her, but I could tell they were also grieving, as my sister had always been difficult and distant. She was still their daughter. They never imagined she'd get this far. They asked me what I wanted to do next. Cut her off completely or try to fix things. But, truthfully, I didn't have an answer. How would you fix something like this? How do you even start repairing a relationship with someone who tried to destroy you? I told them I needed time to think. But deep down, I knew nothing would be the same after that phone call. I went through a variety of emotions. Part of me was furious, angrier than I had ever been in my life. I wanted to confront my sister, scream at her, and ask why she had done something so cruel. But another part of me simply felt empty. So what's the point? Even if I confronted her and got answers, it wouldn't change the fact that she had crossed a line that we could never recover from. In the days that followed, my sister went radio silent. I didn't hear from her, and I didn't want to. She knew she had been caught, and I believe she was too ashamed or stubborn to face any of us. My parents didn't hear from her either, so they were left to pick up the pieces and figure out how we got here. While my sister was hiding out, I began receiving messages from family members, cousins, aunts, and others who had heard the rumors. But they didn't know the whole story. They wanted to understand what was going on, what had actually happened. I was initially reluctant to discuss it. I didn't want to air the dirty laundry, despite the fact that my sister had already tarnished our family's reputation. But eventually, I realized I needed to correct the record. So I started telling everyone the truth. I told them about my sister's actions, how she lied to get the inheritance, and how she accused me of something heinous just to get ahead. And while the majority of them were supportive, a few were skeptical that she had made everything up. It was frustrating to say the least. Even after her story fell apart and my parents believed me, there were still people who couldn't accept that she had lied. They did not want to believe that someone could be so manipulative and cruel, and I understand it. It's difficult to believe that someone would go to such lengths solely for money. But I knew the truth, as did my parents. My sister's absence became increasingly noticeable over the course of several weeks. She wasn't reaching out to anyone, trying to fix things, or even attempting to explain herself. She seemed to have disappeared entirely, and I believe part of me was grateful for that. I didn't want to deal with her anymore, and I didn't have the energy to try to repair something so irreparably damaged. But then, out of the blue, I received a message from her. It wasn't long, only a few sentences, but it threw me off guard. She did not apologize. She did not admit anything. She only said she needed to talk. There were some things I couldn't understand. I wasn't sure what to make of it. After everything she had done, all the lies and manipulation, I wasn't sure I wanted to hear what she had to say. But curiosity got the best of me, and after deliberating for a few days, I agreed to meet her. We met in a park near my house, somewhere public. I didn't want to be alone with her, and I didn't want to give her the opportunity to twist what had happened. When she arrived, she appeared different, tired and worn out, as if she had been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. The first thing she said took me completely off guard. I never intended for it to go this far. I did not respond. I just waited. I'm not sure where she was going with this. She took a deep breath before continuing. I was angry. I was jealous and wanted to hurt you. I figured if I could turn Mom and Dad against you, maybe I'd finally get what I deserved. Her words hit me like a punch in the stomach. I knew she was jealous. I knew she was bitter. But hearing her admit it so directly, it felt like confirmation of everything I'd always feared. She had set out to destroy me. I didn't think it would get so out of control, she said, barely above a whisper. But once I started, I was unable to stop. And when Mom and Dad started asking questions, I didn't know how to say no. I wanted to scream at her and tell her how much she had hurt me, how much she had destroyed. But instead, I stood there silently. I apologize, she said finally. I know it isn't enough, but I don't know what else to say. Her apology hung in the air between us, and for a moment, I had no idea what to say. I had hoped for some kind of acknowledgement from her, some admission of guilt, but I had not expected to hear it out loud. It did not provide the satisfaction I expected. Rather, it felt hollow. I apologize. That's what she had to say after attempting to ruin my life by accusing me of something horrific that could have destroyed everything. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, and a part of me wanted to let it out, tell her exactly how much damage she had caused. But instead, I stood there, numb. What would you like me to say? I finally asked, my voice low, and even then, I forgive you. She looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I don't expect you to forgive me, she explained. I just didn't want it to end with us hating each other. I couldn't stop laughing bitterly at that. We've hated each other since I can remember. What's the difference now? She flinched at my words, but I didn't mind. It was the truth, and she had to hear it. You V always resented me and blamed me for everything bad in your life. But this, you took things too far. She did not argue. She simply stood there, staring at the ground like a chastised child. I wanted to believe she felt guilty, that she deeply regretted what she had done. But deep down, I was unsure whether she did. My sister had always been good at playing the victim, twisting events to make herself appear as the injured party. And now, after everything, I'm not sure if her apology was genuine or just another attempt to manipulate the situation. I didn't know how else to reach out to them, she said quietly. Mom and Dad, they have always favored you. Always been the one who didn't fit in. I was angry, and I figured if I could turn them against you, they'd finally see me. I shook my head in disbelief. So your solution is to accuse me of sexual abuse? Did you think that would make them love you? She winced at my harsh words but did not deny them. I wasn't thinking clearly, she admitted. I was desperate. I know it was wrong and I can't take it back. There it was again. That hollow apology meant nothing to me. I wanted to tell her that apologizing was not enough, that it would never be sufficient. But what's the point? We were too far gone and no amount of words could repair the damage she had caused. I am not sure what you expected to happen when you met with me, I said with a cold voice. Do you think an apology will make things better? That we can simply go back to how things were? She shakes her head. No, I just didn't want to leave things this way. I know I messed up and hurt you, but I'm still your sister. That word, sister, felt like a punch in the gut. How could she still call herself my sister after what she had done? The betrayal was so deep that I questioned whether we could ever be family again, even if I wanted us to be. I'm not sure if we can fix this. I spoke, my voice softening slightly. I'm not sure if I will ever be able to trust you again. Her eyes welled up with tears, and for the first time, I could see genuine pain on her face. I understand, she whispered. I didn't want us to end up hating each other. The conversation left me drained and emotionally exhausted. I wasn't expecting a miracle, but I also didn't expect to feel so empty afterwards. She had apologized, but that didn't change the fact that she had broken up our family. Even though my parents now believe me, the wounds from her accusation would take a long time to heal. In the days that followed, I found myself replaying the conversation over and over in my mind. I wanted to move on, put everything behind me, but it wasn't that easy. My relationship with my sister was beyond repair, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to try to mend it. She had crossed a line that could not be undone, and I wasn't sure I could ever forgive her for it. My parents, on the other hand, were doing their best to move forward. They had completely excluded my sister from the will, further dividing her from the rest of the family. However, I didn't feel satisfied with that. Everyone involved felt like they were on the losing end of the situation. My sister had shattered her relationship with our parents, destroying any hope of reconciliation between us. As time passed, I attempted to focus on rebuilding my life. My parents and I grew closer as we both dealt with the pain of what had happened. But there was always a palpable sadness in the air. My sister's actions cast a dark cloud over us, no matter how hard we tried to move forward. I did not hear from my sister again after our meeting. She said her piece, and I said mine. We both knew there was no way to undo what she had done, and perhaps that was a good thing. Some things are too broken to fix, and our relationship was one of them. But even now, after everything that has happened, I wonder if things could have been different if we hadn't grown up in such a toxic environment, if our parents hadn't shown such obvious favoritism, and if my sister and I would have had a better relationship. Would she have felt compelled to destroy me if she hadn't always felt like an outsider? I suppose I'll never know. As the weeks turned to months, life gradually began to return to some level of normalcy. However, things would never be the same again. My sister's actions could not simply be forgotten or ignored. It lingered like an invisible weight on my shoulders, and I wasn't sure if it would ever leave. I didn't hear from her again, and part of me was relieved after our last meeting, when she attempted to apologize and explain herself. I realized there was nothing else to say. She made her decision, and I made mine. We were finished. In the months that followed, my parents and I became closer. They were still devastated by everything, of course, but I believe they took comfort in knowing they had one child on whom they could rely. My mother had taken the ordeal particularly hard. She couldn't believe her own daughter would fabricate such a terrible lie just to get ahead. It broke her heart, and while she didn't say it outright, I knew she was filled with remorse for how she and my father had treated my sister growing up. I wanted to tell her that it wasn't her fault that my sister's actions were her own, but I couldn't deny that the way we grew up, the constant favoritism, and the distance between my parents and my sister all contributed to the person she became. It did not excuse her actions, but it did help me understand why she was so desperate and angry. My mother once asked me if I thought we would ever be able to reconcile with my sister. I didn't know how to respond to that. Part of me wanted to say no, that there was no way back from something like this. But another part of me remembered the good times we had as kids, no matter how few they were. I wanted to believe that one day things would change. I don't know, Mom, I finally admitted. I believe that some things are too broken to fix. She nodded, her eyes full of sadness. I just wish things had been different, she said softly. I wish we had been a family. I didn't have the heart to tell her that we were never really together, not in the way she wanted to believe. Our family had always been fractured and divided. Even before my sister's lies ripped us apart. This was only the final nail in the coffin. Months later, my sister sent us a letter. It was only a few lines long, stating that she was moving out of state and would no longer be in contact. She didn't apologize or explain herself any further. She simply said goodbye. I showed my parents the letter, and even though they tried to hide it, I could see the pain in their eyes. My father, who had always been so stoic and reserved, appeared to crumble a little more every day after that. He was never the same again after what my sister had done. I wish I could say I was relieved to see the letter and glad she was finally gone from our lives, but it didn't provide the closure I expected. I had spent so much time being angry with her and hating her for what she had done that I hadn't fully accepted the fact that she was still my sister, no matter how twisted and toxic our relationship had become. As the years passed, my parents made their will, leaving everything to me. It seemed like a hollow victory. I had not intended to win in this manner. I didn't want to inherit everything because my sister had been cut out of the family entirely. But that was the reality we were faced with. My parents eventually died, both within a few years of each other. Losing them was difficult, especially given how fractured the family was already. It felt as if the last thread holding everything together had snapped, leaving nothing. I never heard from my sister again. For all I know, she is still living her life somewhere far away. And while a part of me still feels angry and hurt from what she did, another part of me hopes that wherever she has found some peace. Maybe that's naive, but I don't want to hold on to the bitterness indefinitely. I cannot. Looking back, I've realized that family is not always what we expect it to be. We grow up believing that family is an unbreakable bond, that no matter what happens, the people with whom we share blood will always have our back. But this is not always the case. Sometimes the people we should be closest to are the ones who hurt us the most. I quote, am still trying to figure out how to move on from everything. I've made a life for myself, and I'm okay with the fact that my sister is no longer a part of it. The scars, however, remain and will most likely remain for the foreseeable future. In the end, I can only move forward, even if the past remains in the background.